Bienvenue au 22e épisode de la sauce Bitcoin, le podcast francophone qui interviewe des Bitcoiners partout à travers la planète. Cette fois-ci, j'ai accueilli Vlad Costea, un autre hôte de podcast Bitcoin qui s'appelle BTCKVR, donc Bitcoin Takeover Podcast. C'est un Roumain, mais il a étudié à Paris pendant un certain temps, donc il parle français. Évidemment pas parfaitement, donc j'ai dû adapter un peu pour m'adapter à son niveau. Mais malgré tout, il a réussi à répondre à toutes mes questions et j'ai été très content de le connaître car il est un hôte assez important et assez pointu dans son approche de sa recherche dans le Bitcoin. Donc j'espère que vous allez apprécier l'épisode. On a exploré les sources de FOD du Bitcoin et par la suite, on a également continué le podcast en anglais où on était plus à l'aise de discuter sur divers sujets. Donc j'espère que vous allez apprécier et bonne écoute. Bonjour, bienvenue à la sauce Bitcoin à tous les Bitcoiners francophones. Nous sommes rendus au 22e épisode. Aujourd'hui, c'est un épisode spécial. J'ai avec moi Vlad Costea, un
Salut.
Bonjour. Je le suis depuis très longtemps sur Twitter. Il est très actif dans la communauté Bitcoin et il ne parle pas parfaitement français, donc je lui ai envoyé les questions à l'avance. Donc, il fait un gros effort. Mais je suis certain qu'il va réussir à passer au travers de mes questions. Donc,
Ouais, je suis un peu d'un idiote parce que j'ai fait des études à Paris et il y a 7 ans de quand j'ai fait cette étude, mais je ne parle pas hmm, in a satisfactory way. Je ne sais pas comment de dire in a satisfactory way pour
bon,
avoir une conversation décente.
pas de problème. Je crois que ça va être parfait. Combien de temps tu as appris le français? Pendant combien de temps?
J'ai appris des cours en français à l'école de 10 ans jusqu'à 18 ans. Et après, je fais des études à Paris, mais les études étaient en anglais,
Mhm.
100%. Et j'ai appris un peu de français dans la rue, mais le quartier où j'habitais à Paris se nomme Villiers-les-Belles et c'est pas le plus français.
Mhm. Jusqu'à présent, je crois que ça va être parfait. Donc, commençons avec la première question. C'est quoi ton histoire de découverte du Bitcoin?
J'ai découvert Bitcoin en 2013. Alors, je regardais des mèmes sur une page qui s'appelle 9gag. J'avais 21 ans en 2013 et je me souviens avoir pensé que le Bitcoin était vraiment idiot. J'avais accès à un compte bancaire, je pouvais envoyer de l'argent à qui je voulais. Pourquoi aurais-je besoin de quelque chose comme Bitcoin dans ma vie? Puis j'ai lu qu'il était principalement utilisé pour les drogues et j'ai perdu tout intérêt. J'ai écrit la version longue de cette histoire dans la préface de ma revue Breaking FUD, mais il m'est arrivé des moments où le système monétaire universel et neutre m'aurait aidé à surmonter cette difficulté. Une de ces fois était en 2015, lorsque j'étais étudiant d'échange à Sciences Po Paris, et je n'ai pas pu ouvrir de compte bancaire car mon propriétaire ne voulait pas signer du contrat. Je n'avais pas donc accès aux réductions étudiantes pour les transports en commun. Je ne pouvais même pas activer une carte SIM pour mon téléphone. Donc, pendant presque 3 mois, je n'avais aucun moyen d'appeler ou de recevoir des appels en 2015. À la fin, quelqu'un m'a donné sa carte SIM et je l'ai payée en espèces, cash. C'est fou à quel point nous dépendons des banques. Mais ces petits événements qui m'ont fait me sortir comme un étranger m'ont aidé à mieux comprendre pourquoi Bitcoin existe et comment il peut améliorer ma vie. Imagine si j'avais acheté des bitcoins et découvert un service comme Bitrefill à ce moment-là, cela aurait tout changé. Mais pour revenir au sujet principal de votre question, j'ai acheté du Bitcoin pour la première fois en 2017 et j'ai passé la majeure partie de l'année à trader divers shitcoins. La raison pour laquelle j'ai acheté, c'est que le marché a prouvé que tous les économistes et publications médiatiques que je lisais à l'université avaient tort. Il y avait donc certainement plus à ce que Bitcoin, c'est qu'on me disait. Cependant, je ne le comprenais pas assez bien et j'ai commencé à parler, ce qui m'a pris environ un an et m'a fait perdre de l'argent dans une marche aux yeux. Entre-temps, je comprends ce que Bitcoin et comment il fonctionne. C'est pourquoi je commençais à utiliser mes compétences pour trouver des emplois dans ce domaine. J'ai mon premier poste d'écrivain début 2018 chez Crypto Globe, puis je suis passé à Crypto Insider, où à un moment donné, j'étais aussi rédacteur en chef. Et ensuite, j'ai également écrit pour Bitcoin Magazine pendant environ 6 mois. Peu importe où j'allais, je me sentais frustré, surmené et malheureuse. J'ai donc décidé de me concentrer sur Bitcoin Takeover, mon propre projet. Aujourd'hui, j'ai un podcast en anglais et un magazine. Magazine signifie revue, qui a été traduit en français, espagnol et allemand. Sur Twitter, je poste aussi de mèmes amusants sur la Toyota Supra.
Ah oui, j'ai vu cela. Merci pour l'introduction de ton histoire. Donc, tu as dit que tu étais malheureux euh, dans tes travails dans le Bitcoin avant de commencer ton propre magazine. Pourquoi tu étais malheureux? Pourquoi tu as décidé de partir le tien, ton propre podcast?
J'ai lancé le Bitcoin Takeover podcast en janvier 2019, principalement comme plan de secours parce que mon travail chez Crypto Insider s'affondrait. Décembre 2018 était une période très difficile pour le marché et je me souviens comment toute l'équipe se demanderait si l'entreprise allait couler. Finalement, environ 6 mois plus tard, la publication a fermé, mais au moment où Crypto Insider a fermé, je commençais déjà la 13e saison de Bitcoin Takeover podcast. Sur le plan personnel, j'ai commencé à enregistrer mon podcast alors que ma grand-mère était en train de mourir. C'était un moment douloureux pour moi, car ma grand-mère s'est occupée de moi dans mes premières années de vie et j'ai toujours été proche d'elle. J'avais donc besoin de travailler sur quelque chose pour ne pas me sentir triste tout le temps. Depuis, ma grand-mère aurait voulu que je réussisse par moi-même plutôt que de vendre mon travail à d'autres. Tout dans cette aventure semblait risqué à l'époque parce qu'en 2019, tout le monde lançait un podcast, mais je suis à rester plus longtemps que la plupart de mes pairs. Je pense que la longévité de Bitcoin Takeover Podcast est due au fait qu'il a pour principal objectif de m'aider à apprendre davantage sur ce qui se passe avec Bitcoin. Le fait que d'autres puissent bénéficier de ces précieux d'apprentissage est en effet secondaire, mais ce n'est pas la priorité principale. Tant que je trouvais le podcast intéressant pour moi-même, je continue et je poursuis le sujet que je trouve intéressant. La plupart des gars qui ont lancé un podcast à peu près en même temps cherchait seulement à se faire des contrats dans le milieu pour trouver un emploi. Après avoir obtenu le travail qu'ils voulaient, ils ont continué leur chemin. Pour moi, travailler sur mon propre projet et grandir chaque jour est le travail en lui-même. Rien au monde ne peut être comparé à la construction de son propre projet. En quoi le Bitcoin Takeover podcast est-il différent? Eh bien, il évolue avec moi. Donc, si j'apprends quelque chose de nouveau sur Bitcoin dans un épisode, je vais utiliser cette connaissance dans l'enregistrement suivant avec quelqu'un d'autre. Cela me rend moins abordable pour les novices, mais en fait une excellente émission pour les intermédiaires qui connaissent déjà le base. Je rencontre les auditeurs de mon podcast lors des conférences sur le Bitcoin et la plupart d'entre eux sont des Bitcoiners de la promotion 2013 qui cherchent des entreprises Bitcoin dans lesquelles ils peuvent investir. Je ne suis pas jamais devenu très populaire, mais j'aime penser que la qualité des auditeurs est bien plus importante de leur nombre.
Je suis d'accord avec toi. C'est fascinant ton histoire. Moi aussi, j'écoute ton podcast. Justement, je trouve qu'il est un peu différent des autres. Et quelle saison et épisode as-tu préféré jusqu'à présent sur ton podcast?
Oh. Il m'est très difficile de choisir mes épisodes préférés car ils font tout partie de mon parcours d'évolution en tant que Bitcoiner. Mais certains moments marquants incluent l'épisode 7 de saison 4 avec Peter Todd, un enregistrement qui a démystifié beaucoup de ce que les marketeurs m'avaient enseigné sur la sécurité. J'ai aussi beaucoup appris en intervenant Slash de Trésor, le créateur de la première poule de minage au monde et du premier portefeuille matériel. Et j'ai également apprécié interviewer Thomas Voigtlin, créateur de Electrum, qui est également français. Parmi les autres noms, sans ordre particulier, on trouve Yuval Kogman, qui a créé Wabi Sabi pour CoinJoin, Eric Martindale de Portal, qui construit Défi sur la couche 3 de Bitcoin, Kenichi Kurimoto de Nayuta, Japon, Joshua Shigala de Voltoro, Ben Ark de LMBits, Sergei Kotliat de Bitrefill.
Mon patron.
Ah oui, il est génial. J'apprécie généralement d'interviewer les développeurs et les personnes qui construisent des choses, penser à l'avenir de Bitcoin et ce qui les motive à continuer. Et encore, si tu me demandes la même question demain, je crois que je pouvais offrir des réponses différentes.
Super. Euh, juste pour informer les auditeurs, toi, tu viens de la Roumanie et j'imagine que à la Roumanie, il y a également le Bitcoin existe et le monde l'utilise dans une certaine perspective. Donc, quel est l'état du Bitcoin et de l'industrie du Bitcoin en Roumanie et quels, selon toi, les cas d'application les plus criants et qu'est-ce qui manque en Roumanie en termes d'adoption du Bitcoin?
Ah. Je pense que la compréhension de Bitcoin est encore très faible en Roumanie. Nous avons un gros problème avec les jeux d'argent au niveau national. Jeux d'argent signifie gambling, car les points de paris et les casinos sont les entreprises les plus rentables dans chaque quartier. La plupart des gens traitent également les bitcoins comme un jeu d'argent et une spéculation, bien que j'ai observé une amélioration constante au cours des deux derniers ans. Il existe des très bons groupes Telegram qui aident les gens à en apprendre davantage sur les bitcoins et parfois je continue avec des explications lorsque les gens posent des questions intéressantes. Actuellement, je travaille sur la traduction de mon review en roman et j'espère obtenir un contrat d'édition d'une maison qui a une large distribution. Je pense que le roman moyen a besoin du Bitcoin, mais il ne comprend pas suffisamment bien. C'est pourquoi je tente de contribuer à l'éducation. La plupart des influenceurs et YouTubeurs dans ce domaine sont uniquement centrés sur les signaux de trading, sur les échanges centralisés. Et je pense que les gens méritent un contenu bien meilleur.
Super. J'ai beaucoup d'amis roumains et moldaves à Montréal. Euh,
Comment s'appelle-t-il?
euh, je pense pas que tu les connais. Mais il y en a un qui s'appelle Daniel, un autre Roman, mais je pense pas que tu les connais. C'est...
Euh, je ne suis pas sûr.
non.
Envoie-moi des images,
Ah, ok,
des
super.
photos.
Euh, J'aimerais te poser une question également au niveau de Wasabi. J'ai des amis qui travaillent à Wasabi et personnellement, j'utilise Wasabi pour mon anonymat. Mais évidemment, il y a eu beaucoup de controverses dans la dernière année. Et je sais que toi, tu es quelqu'un qui est vraiment actif au niveau du débat, par exemple, entre Wasabi et Samouraï. Et aussi, Wasabi sponsor ton podcast. Donc, peut-être tu pourrais donner un aperçu de ton opinion sur le sujet.
Ton ami Thibaut Marshall.
Thibaut Maréchal et également Gustavo Flores HS. Je ne sais pas si tu connais. Mais c'est les deux personnes que je connais. Et un autre développeur euh, aussi.
OK. Je crois que Wasabi a développé les transactions conjointes les meilleures, les plus avancées et les plus évolutives sur la couche 1 de Bitcoin. Elles peuvent avoir jusqu'à 400 entrées et 400 sorties et une seule transaction, ce qui signifie qu'il y a une grande foule dans laquelle les participants peuvent se cacher. De plus, elles ne génèrent aucun rendu, donc tout votre remontant en BTC est mélangé. Actuellement, Wasabi est le leader du marché et enregistre les plus hauts volumes chaque jour. Je pense que le problème avec le filtrage est une conséquence des années d'accusations de blanchiment d'argent pour les criminels et de figurer dans les rapports de l'Europol, sachant que leurs développeurs sont publics et ont des familles. Ils ont choisi la voie la plus lâche et la plus sûre en embauchant entier pour maintenir une liste d'adresses associées à des crimes afin que les coordinateurs conjoints puissent le rejeter. Les portefeuilles Wasabi fonctionnent sur le réseau d'anonymisation Tor et obligent tous les utilisateurs à télécharger des filtres de blocs. Cela signifie que les criminels rejetés par le coordinateur ne peuvent être suivis ni identifiés. Cela signifie également pour les échanges et entreprises Bitcoin n'ont aucune raison de refuser leurs transactions provenant des coinjoins de Wasabi, car il ne peut y avoir aucune suspicion d'une origine criminelle. La vie privée est également pour les personnes honnêtes qui ne veulent pas subir une surveillance efficace. En tant que concurrent, Samurai a toujours été agressif sur les médias sociaux et déraisonnable. Cependant, il passe beaucoup plus de temps à insulter les gens et à poster sur Twitter qu'à développer leur portefeuille. Si Wasabi fait des coinjoins de 400 participants, Samurai ne peut en faire que 5. Samurai génère également un rendu toxique qui peut désanonymiser les utilisateurs qui les consolident. Les plus importants, c'est que Samurai sans le dojo fera que les développeurs du portefeuille collectent les expab de leurs utilisateurs, les clés publiques étendues. Je pense qu'à ce stade, Wasabi a une technologie tellement avancée que même si vous savez théoriquement qui rejoint une transaction CoinJoin, vous aurez du mal à savoir à qui appartient chaque sortie. Dans Samurai, si vous connaissez les entrées, vous connaissez également les sorties car elles ont la même taille. On pourrait dire que je défends Wasabi parce qu'il parraine mon podcast, mais j'utilise leur portefeuille depuis de février 2019 et j'ai vu toutes les améliorations être ajoutées. Pendant ce temps, Samurai est resté stagnant. Leurs transactions CoinJoin sont toujours les mêmes. Leur portefeuille mobile a toujours des fonctionnalités de confidentialité optionnelles qui devraient être obligatoires. Je serai toujours du côté des innovateurs qui repoussent constamment les limites de la technologie.
Super, je suis d'accord avec toi. J'ai fait un épisode sur la sauce Bitcoin avec Thibaut Maréchal et nous rentrons plus dans les détails de tout ça. Mais merci pour ton opinion. Sinon, je sais que tu es quelqu'un qui suit beaucoup les développements techniques du Bitcoin. D'ailleurs, c'est pour cela que j'écoute beaucoup ton podcast, parce que tu invites justement des développeurs qui sont aptes à expliquer la technologie d'une manière simplifiée. Et je me demandais, toi personnellement, qu'est-ce qui t'excite le plus dans le Bitcoin en ce moment en termes d'avancement? Lightning, Arc, les secondes couches, les sidechains. Quelle est ton opinion générale sur l'avenir du Bitcoin d'un point de vue technique?
Je suis enthousiaste à l'idée que Lightning devient plus facile et plus fiable à utiliser. Je suis excité à l'idée qu'Arc devienne un concurrent et je suis heureuse que nous parlions de sidechain plus sérieusement ces jours, c'est grâce au Drive Chain. Mais en fin de compte, le facteur le plus important est l'adoption. L'adoption. Nous pouvons développer les meilleures technologies, mais si la plupart des gens n'utilisent pas Bitcoin, cela n'a pas beaucoup de sens. Dans mon podcast, je consacre beaucoup de temps à interviewer des personnes sur les avancées. Il est intéressant de voir comment il faut environ 4 à 5 ans pour transformer une proposition à une bonne mise en œuvre que n'importe qui peut utiliser. C'est pourquoi le développement de Bitcoin a besoin le plus de financement et le réseau Bitcoin a besoin de plus d'adaptation pour accélérer le processus et nous aider à dépasser la phase de réserve de valeur. Bitcoin est une monnaie numérique non gouvernementale et devrait être utilisée comme telle. Si nous allons encore aux conférences Bitcoin et payons notre déjeuner avec des cartes de crédit, qu'est-ce que nous faisons même ici?
C'est vrai. Je suis d'accord avec toi. C'est un peu ironique euh, que les Bitcoiners utilisent encore le fiat. Euh, donc, en plus, tu as lancé un appel sur Twitter justement pour promouvoir ton magazine. Donc, tu l'as mentionné. Tu es le fondateur et gestionnaire du magazine Bitcoin Takeover. Je vais mettre le lien de ton site dans la description, évidemment. Donc, il s'agit d'un magazine open source, donc logiciel libre en français, qui traite de divers sujets sur le Bitcoin et tu le distribues souvent gratuitement lors des conférences grâce à des compagnies qui vont sponsoriser la distribution. Et c'est également disponible sur ton site Internet complètement gratuitement. Donc, euh, premièrement, est-ce que tu peux commencer en expliquant quel est le concept d'un magazine open source?
Je crée le magazine open source BTCTKVR, Bitcoin Takeover, car je voulais créer des ressources d'apprentissage que n'importe quoi dans le monde peut utiliser gratuitement. Actuellement, je suis au 13e magasin qui s'appelle Breaking FUD. C'est un projet qui vise à fournir une éducation à l'envers. La plupart des livres et articles essayent d'enseigner aux gens ce que Bitcoin. Je suppose que les gens ont déjà entendu parler et savent quelque chose de leurs ressources médiatiques ou gouvernementales. Donc, je prends ces idées reçues qui leur ont été présentées dans du FAD et je déconstruis les arguments pour apporter des nuances. En gros, je crois que si tout le monde lisait Breaking FUD, nous pourrions facilement atteindre 100 000 euros par Bitcoin sans BlackRock, sans MicroStrategy et d'autres institutions. Je crois également que l'adoption populaire qui commence par les plus petites personnes n- et ne, et ne privilégie pas les élites est la raison pour laquelle Bitcoin a été créé et également ce qui fonctionne le mieux pour ce type de projet. Le magazine de l'année dernière a été traduit par un Français qui se nomme Gritoshi, le prince du Moula Coin. Il a emporté quelques exemplaires à Surfing Bitcoin à Biarritz, à previous year,
Mhm.
dernière année,
De regarder.
à Biarritz. Et j'ai perdu. OK. Il a emporté quelques exemplaires à Surfing Bitcoin à Biarritz et le magazine également était imprimé à Sénégal. Je crois que c'est une ressource très utile et j'encourage tout le monde à télécharger depuis le site web de Bitcoin Takeover. Je pouvais l'imprimer, le vendre, en faire ce que vous voulez, tant que vous donnez crédit aux auteurs et ne prendre pas que c'est votre travail.
Donc, selon toi, Vlad, quelles sont les plus grosses sources de FUD en bref sur le Bitcoin? Pour ceux qui ne savent pas, FUD est une abréviation pour Fear, Uncertainty and Doubt, donc peur, incertitude et doute en français. Donc, selon toi, quelles sont les plus grosses sources de FUD?
Dans mon magazine Breaking FUD, j'ai pris en compte 10 sources de FUD, la réglementation gouvernementale, les altcoins, la mise à l'échelle, les vulnérabilités de sécurité, la volatilité des prix, les cas d'utilisation limitée, la consommation d'énergie, la centralisation de l'exploitation minière, mining, l'éducation et l'acceptation grand public. Et je pense que ce sont certaines des principales sources de FAD qui peuvent être plus facilement démontées. Cependant, il existe un FAD légitime concernant la garantie du budget de sécurité de Bitcoin. Cela signifie que nous devons nous assurer que les mineurs restent rentables après que leur récompense ait été divisée par de plusieurs fois. Bitcoin est un système basé sur l'avidité, ce qui signifie que tout le monde agit selon son meilleur intérêt financier. Pour l'instant, être un acteur honnête est le plus rentable, mais nous devons nous assurer que cela restera toujours le cas. Et une autre ressource légitime de FAD concerne la fongibilité monétaire. Une bonne monnaie nécessite que n'importe quelle unité soit égale à une autre de son genre. Avec Bitcoin, nous pouvons faire de la discrimination sociale basée sur les origines de l'argent. C'est loin d'être idéal. C'est pourquoi nous avons des technologies comme CoinJoin pour égaliser le PS. Mais nous devons trouver une manière techniquement supérieure qui rend la discrimination impossible. Nous devrions donc garder un œil sur les innovations en matière de confidentialité et de la cryptographie pour, espérons-le, améliorer Bitcoin à l'avenir. J'écris sur tous ces problèmes dans Breaking FAD, la magazine. Actuellement, vous pouvez le lire en anglais et en allemand, mais j'espère que dans quelques mois, j'aurai également une édition française que vous pourrez apprécier. C'est un magazine pour les sceptiques de Bitcoin pour rendre la conversation sur Bitcoin plus nuancée. J'espère donc qu'il y a d'intérêt de la part de la communauté française pour que ces projets existent également dans la langue de Voltaire et Diderot.
Super. Si je peux aider d'une quelconque manière à la traduction, je suis disponible.
Ah,
Ensuite,
merci.
donc, pour ceux qui ne te connaissent pas, ben, ils vont savoir que tu as beaucoup d'expérience en création de contenu, en gestion de projet, connaissances techniques et entrepreneuriales, comme avec ton magazine, avec ton podcast. Donc, je suis curieux, toi, personnellement, comment tu vois ton avenir dans le Bitcoin? Et maintenant, tu dis que tu es indépendant. Donc, mais je pense que tu as d'autres projets qui vont évoluer. Donc, c'est quoi ton avenir et tes futurs projets dans l'univers du Bitcoin?
Je pense que mon projet futur est mon projet actuel, mais amélioré. Je continuerai à réaliser les podcasts Bitcoin Takeover. J'essaierai de publier un nouveau magazine chaque année et de le promouvoir lors des conférences et dans d'autres podcasts comme le vôtre. Peut-être que si je deviens plus succès, je pourrais embaucher d'autres adeptes de Bitcoin pour créer d'excellentes ressources éducatives. Je ne vois pas cela rester en one-man show pendant trop longtemps, mais tout dépendant de la demande de la communauté. Si les gens apprécient beaucoup de mon travail, j'obtiendrai de meilleurs contrats de parrainage et serai en mesure d'entendre le projet Bitcoin Takeover. Je pense avoir trouvé ma place. J'aime Bitcoin et j'aime travailler pour mon projet, pour mon propre projet. Et j'aimerais aussi aider les autres en termes de trouver un bon endroit pour exprimer leur créativité. Si quelqu'un à l'écoute a des articles rédigés en français sur Bitcoin, je peux également les publier sur mon site web. Je ne suis pas dans une position où je peux payer actuellement, mais je peux certainement vous aider à promouvoir votre travail et à le montrer au monde. C'est également ce qu'a fait Gritoshi, le traducteur français du magazine BTC-TKVR, et je suis heureuse d'aider à introduire davantage de voix de la communauté française. Bitcoin est un projet mondial non gouvernemental. C'est dommage que les premiers adoptants soient seulement ceux qui parlent bien anglais. Peut-être pouvons-nous faire quelque chose à ce sujet. Euh, C'est ce que je pense.
Effectivement. Euh, ben, merci beaucoup, Vlad, pour ton effort de parler en français. Je pense que tu parles très bien et J'espère que dans le futur, tu vas produire plus de contenu en français peut-être. But let's switch to English maybe for some few questions I have. So I was saying, I think you speak really good French, and yeah, definitely if we can collaborate in any ways to propagate Bitcoin in the French world as well, I will be glad to see how I can help. And there's a lot of French speakers around the world, right? So it's worth the effort, I think, not only in France but also in the Americas and Africa. There's a huge French-speaking population, so I think it's definitely worth it. But my first question in English is, what about the Supra meme? Can you explain the origins of that and the goal of it? I think it's a cool meme, and so maybe you can tell the story about it.
Yeah, so when I first of all, it's good to not have to read my answers anymore. I can just think and talk, which is very nice. I felt a bit like a 7th grade student who was asked by his teacher in class to read from the textbook. I hope I did a good job there. I prepared a bit. Maybe it was a bit, how should I put it, langue de bois, meaning that it was not expressive enough, but I tried my best with the French that I know and the French that I can get on the internet. But thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy that. Now about the Supra meme.
Mm-hmm.
When I first got into Bitcoin, everyone was talking about Lambos. At $10,000 per Bitcoin, we're going to get Lambos. And I was like, no, I don't have enough Bitcoin for that. And I was thinking, what's the plebs Lambo? What is something that gives you 90% of the experience of a Lambo at about 10% of the price of a Lambo? And that's the Toyota Supra. And why is it the Toyota Supra? Because it's incredibly mimetic. Like, it sounds great. It's Supra. It sounds like super. Dan Held was speaking about the super cycle. I speak about the Supra cycle, when we all get Supras and then we get girlfriends. Because what can a Bitcoiner want in his life other than, we're nerds, so we want nice cars and nice girlfriends. So I think it's a very powerful meme. And there's more to say about the Supra as a car because it has a very beautiful legacy. It has been featured in the movies The Fast and the Furious. I think our generation grew up playing Need for Speed games on their computer or their PlayStation or whatever. And Need for Speed Underground and Underground 2 featured the Toyota Supra, and that was one of the best cars. Very good handling, very good acceleration, just all across the board, excellent. So I think that the Bitcoiner generation has a great appreciation for the Toyota Supra, and it just happens to be 10% of the price of a Lambo. And it makes much more sense to be low time preference and buy something which is very close to a Lambo, but isn't a fancy brand, because you also pay for the branding when you buy a sports car. And I think the Supra ticks a lot of boxes, looks very nice. It makes me happy only when I look at it. And that's the kind of car that I want, as opposed to only something that is okay looking.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, it's not flashy enough. Like, if you buy a Lambo, everyone's going to be like, oh, this guy's a drug dealer or something. Mm-hmm. If you buy a Supra, people are going to be like, oh, this guy has some money, but maybe not enough to launch a $10 wrench attack on them.
So where's your it made me think I forgot to ask you a question about the best resources you recommend to people in French, but that's my fault. What's your price point for getting a Supra then, Bitcoin price point? That you're going to sacrifice some Bitcoins to get one?
It's hard-coded in the time chain that one Supra is 0.1 Bitcoin. So when one Supra is 0.1 Bitcoin, we all get Supras and then we get girlfriends. But let's hope this happens during the next bull market.
You mentioned during the podcast that you like Sergey Kotliar, which is my boss, by the way, because I work at Bitrefill. And maybe he would have a different opinion in terms of what you think is a Bitcoiner. You say we're nerds and don't have girlfriends for the majority, but you probably listened to few of his speeches in Bitcoin Prague, or maybe you heard about like his new rhetoric about Bitcoin users. That, for example, on Bitrefill, the people that use Bitcoin.
My camera died again, sorry, but we can go on.
Yeah, let's go on. The people that use Bitcoin on Bitrefill are not necessarily Bitcoiners in a sense where they're gonna listen to Bitcoin podcasts or go to Bitcoin conferences. And he makes an analogy that okay, if you have a car, you don't necessarily go to a car conference, right? So isn't it the same thing with Bitcoin? What do you think about this type of uh, view of the Bitcoiners?
Well, I think there's a lot of sense in what he's saying, and I have great respect for Sergey. But at the same time, the people who follow me on Twitter and like my stuff and engage with my content are hardcore Bitcoiners, and I need to speak to them. I need to find a common ground, and I think that all of us want girlfriends. It's when you tell a girl that you're into Bitcoin, you're not gonna get too much attention. The main reaction is gonna be like, oh, this guy's a nerd. And I think also the whole NFT bubble has created more of a stigma, as most people can't even tell the difference between Bitcoin and NFTs and whatever. And they're gonna be like, oh, shut up, just leave me alone with your stupid monkey JPEGs or whatever. So I think there is unnecessary stigma that gets carried with telling girls that you're a Bitcoiner. I mean, of course, there's always the gold digging or Bitcoin digging class that is going to think, oh, this guy must be rich. But most of them just think, oh, this guy's a nerd. I don't want to deal with him. I want to go out with the guy who's good at sports, with the guy who goes to the gym and stuff. So there's, I guess, a lot of power in and potential in the Supra, because it can remove some of this stigma. It can prove to girls like, oh, this guy spent 0.1 Bitcoin on this nice car. Maybe that there's something to it. I don't know. But my point is that I'm trying to appeal to my audience to some extent, to tell them something that they do want to hear. And I'm not the kind of guy to be like, oh, we're going to $1 million per coin. And look at this institution. They're buying Bitcoin. Let's all praise Michael Saylor for buying another 10,000 Bitcoin with his institution or whatever. I'm not that kind of person. I'm more of a grassroots adoption kind of guy. And I think in terms of what we can do as opposed to what the elites can do to us. So I think this Supra meme plays a very nice role and blends into this culture of being a self-made person and trying to do your best with your life.
I understand. I think you need to materialize it in real life and be the first one to actually do it. And then it will really explode, or has the potential to explode. Let's see. I'm curious, you're talking about grassroots adoption. Have you got the chance to go to El Salvador or other type of circular economy? I personally live in Mexico, and there's a lot of like them around. I'm probably sure that in Europe it's not the same thing. So what do you mean by grassroots adoption? Is it like this use cases like in El Salvador, in the El Zonte, or in the Bitcoin jungle type of community efforts, or are you talking about something else?
Well, grassroots adoption can mean anything that starts from the individual. When you decide that you have had enough with your government and you don't want to use their money anymore. And that's what real grassroots adoption is. When you build a parallel economy with somebody else and you use this type of money to fuel this economy and this unit of account, which is Bitcoin. I'm not sure to which extent. So you asked me if I went to El Salvador. Almost, because last year I bought my plane ticket, I paid for my hotel. I was supposed to go there, but then I got the COVID and I felt like crap for a few weeks. And I decided to not go because, I'm not trying to say nasty stuff about the El Salvador health system or whatever. I just don't know anything about it. And when you don't speak the language and you're in a foreign country and you might need some medical assistance, it's not a very good idea to go. I mean, even if they had the perfect hospitals and stuff, it's still difficult when you can't tell the doctor what's wrong with you. So I decided to stay home last year. Maybe I'm going to go this year. I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided. I have this travel budget every year, and by now I kind of depleted it, meaning that I went to some conferences in Europe this year. I went to Poland, in Warsaw. I went to Prague twice for Pizza Day and for BTC Prague. I went to Mallorca, where they were nice enough to pay for my expenses. So I went to a lot of places, and I'm still going to go to Baltic Honey Badger and Hackers Congress and the Proof of Work conference, still in Prague. So by the end of the year, I will have been in Prague 4 times, which is kind of insane. That's kind of the hottest place in Europe right now where Bitcoin stuff is happening. But I might go to El Salvador, and I'm not sure to which extent. So in Prague, when you go to Paralelní Polis, which is a cafe where they accept Bitcoin payments, and it's all about cypherpunk culture when you talk with people, that's grassroots adoption because it's a parallel society within a fiat society. And it's people who voluntarily decided that they want to use that currency. In El Zonte on Bitcoin Beach, that's also grassroots adoption because this preceded the legal tender laws. It's people who went there and then they decided to build this economy for themselves. But I disagree that what's happening in El Salvador since the legal tender laws is grassroots adoption because it required a law to come from the top, and it required a politician who's in office to tell them to install a certain wallet and use Bitcoin in a certain way. To me, that's top down. It's the opposite of grassroots. And I was pretty critical of what's going on in El Salvador for various reasons. It's also why I'm not saying 100% that I'm going there. I have sympathy for the people, the locals who are open-minded and want to experiment with Bitcoin. But I'm ideologically not aligned with the idea of a government telling you that you should use a currency and that you should accept it. That's anti-Bitcoin by definition. And I remember when I booked my hotel last year and I asked them, do you accept Bitcoin? And they said, no, please only give us dollars. And I jokingly told someone that they don't even accept Bitcoin, and they were like, oh, you can report them or something. I was like, I'm not going to use the state to make them accept Bitcoin for me. That's not the point. That's not the purpose. I don't want to act like a Western Karen or something who goes to them and is like, oh, you don't accept Bitcoin. Let me speak to your manager. You're going to accept Bitcoin because I want you to take it. To me, Bitcoin is voluntary. You choose to use it and you know why you use it. And nobody else should coerce you into using it. And maybe that it pumps your bags to have nation state adoption. But to me, it doesn't really make much sense. And that's not why I got into this.
I understand. I'm hearing more and more from people on the ground in El Salvador. I mean, of course, there's a lot of people doing absolutely great work, but some of it seems a bit forced. So, for example, the Bitcoin meetups are full, but some people that are going to these meetups are not necessarily Bitcoiners. They just want to take advantage of the hype and basically sell their businesses to Bitcoiners that are there by pretending they are as well Bitcoiners. But for example, I think in Costa Rica, there's a region that without, of course, any intervention from the government is really, really active in terms of Bitcoin adoption, a little bit like El Donte is from a natural initiative. So I agree with you. It has to come from the ground, and go up than the other way around. So I'm curious, like, how is this thing going for you in terms of being able to live on with your podcast? And because we had some discussion outside the podcast in terms of Bitcoin marketing, what works to make money, but what works in order to really advance the movement. Do you have any thoughts on your work and how it will progress in terms of your involvement but also monetary involvement. I don't know if my question is clear.
Yeah, it's very open-ended, but I can understand what you're saying. I think a lot of creators in the space are struggling financially to make ends meet. And it's also a lot more frustrating when you realize that there's that Ethereum podcast that's called Bankless. And those guys make hundreds of thousands of dollars every month just by getting sponsors from shady projects. I mean, they got busted a few times promoting something. I think it was Celsius or one of these lending services. I'm not sure which one, but they got busted, but it seems like the audience doesn't care. And it's a bit frustrating when you know that technically you're putting a lot more work than they are, and you're producing much higher quality stuff that's going to be relevant 10 years from now still, as opposed to something which is as vapid as some ICO or some NFT project that's not going to be around for long, but is only meant to enrich a few people. But I think there's a greater satisfaction from playing the long game. And I think the most important part is to be able to survive, to keep going. Because I can name, I guess, a dozen of podcasts and websites and projects that were very promising, started out putting a lot of good content, but they had to give up during bear markets. And I'm not even sure if they came back after the markets got better. So I think what's most important, first and foremost, is for you to be passionate about what you do, because without that, you're going to give up very fast. You know, you assume that the average Bitcoiner is rich and can give you a lot of money, and we have a thriving economy, but we also have this hodl culture, which makes people reluctant and think twice every time they have to send a donation or something in Bitcoin. And whenever someone tells me, oh, you should go value for value and accept only donations and not have sponsorships, that's not realistic. It's not reliable. Maybe you get some donations in the beginning, but then people will always be like, yeah, I already gave you money. Why can't you survive? And then you tell them, you know, that money only paid for my internet and electricity bill. Like, I'm not sure if you can understand the concept, but life is not very cheap and inflation hasn't made it any better. And you got to struggle to survive. And it's also kind of silly that we normalize the idea of mining fiat, as in it's perfectly fine to be a Bitcoiner, but at the same time be so entrenched in a normal everyday job. But I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but if you're so hardcore into this project, and we have this money project, and we have all of these whales who can support, we're not actually trying to make statements to prove that there is really an alternative. And we always fall back on this fiat system. And I can even think of hardcore Bitcoin libertarians who took money from the state during the pandemic. I'm not going to name them, but I can think of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit of a hypocritical hybrid game right now. And I find it hard to blame anyone, but I can blame them for LARPing, for pretending to be what they're not.
Well, you've mentioned like a really good point, like the hodl culture. Personally, I've seen examples of like Bitcoiners shitting on other entrepreneurs that wanted to, you know, they are doing efforts in order to promote Bitcoin, but at the same time, of course, you have to live, and you also want to grow as an individual in terms of wealth for your family, for your future. So obviously, the goal is not only to educate people about Bitcoin, but to also make a profit. But some Bitcoiners might have this reluctance of like, oh, why are you doing this for profit? I mean, you always do something. Well, some people are doing it by pure passion, but obviously, if you're young and you plan to have a family, you want to have secure your future, right? So, for example, I've seen some debate. There was like the first Bitcoin Canadian conference happened a few months ago, and the tickets were like really cheap, maybe 300 Canadian dollars, which is, you know, for a conference. to assist for 2-3 days. It's really cheap in terms of other type of conferences that could happen in the Bitcoin industry, and even cheaper than other type of industries. And they got some backlash that, oh, why are you trying to make money out of Bitcoiners, Canadian Bitcoiners? And it's like, man, these people have been taking 6 months of their lives contacting people, needing to pay for a lot of stuff, and they organize this great thing, and then you say to them, why are you trying to make a profit out of this? So and Bitcoiners are supposed to be like more capitalistic, free market, and wanting to do businesses. So it's hard. Sometimes it's weird, this mentality of coming from Bitcoiners. I don't know if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean, and it's also interesting to observe how a lot of these never sell your Bitcoin people are associated with big KYC exchanges and custodians. And it basically makes you wonder, are they not trying to basically make you buy more and dump on you during the bull market and turning you into a bag holder for the long time? I mean, okay, maybe we're going to go to 1 million and it's going to be the perfect financial decision. But you're going to be encouraged always to be greedier and wait for longer. And we have seen that there are all of these institutions that get into Bitcoin, from Tesla to all the others that were bragging to have added some Bitcoin reserves back in 2021. They all sold. They didn't believe in Bitcoin as a project. They only wanted the volatility, and they wanted to report more profits in US dollars. And I'm sure that MicroStrategy will also sell at one point, because they report their profits in US dollars. They can say whatever they want to get others to buy, but I believe that at the end of the day, it's also evident that they care very much about their US dollars, and their Bitcoin is mostly a PR campaign to fundraise more US dollars. So yeah, there's a lot of hypocrisy in the space, and there are too many people who believe that spending $100 worth of Bitcoin is going to deprive their nephews of their generational wealth, and they're not going to live in citadels, and they're not going to get good education because you spent $100 to go to a conference and buy a ticket. I mean, not everyone today is going to have a pizza event that Laszlo Hanias had 13 years ago. It has been such a long time. There's so much money that went into this industry. It has been so capitalized. I'm not going to make predictions or speculate on how much one Bitcoin will be worth in 5 or 10 years, but it will not be worth more if you don't use it as money. It was needed for Laszlo to spend his money on 2 pizzas, to spend his 10,000 Bitcoin, because otherwise there would be no market for the Bitcoin. Unless you're expanding the market and increasing the flow of the currency and you're making more people accept it, you're not going to have more demand for it. And if you don't have more demand for it, you're not going to have astronomical prices. So it's a twofold blade. On one hand, someone has to sacrifice and create more adoption by giving some of their Bitcoin. But on the other hand, the long-term benefit is that the Bitcoin that they have accumulated are going to be much more valuable in time, because more people have used Bitcoin and they have learned how it works and they care about it. And this is a point that was made by my friend Gritoshi, who translated the magazine in French. He said that Bitcoin is the only money system where the person who owns $100 worth of Bitcoin and the person who is a Bitcoin whale defend the project with the same amount of conviction. Whereas in the fiat system, if someone has €100 and someone else has 100 million euro, they're going to have varying degrees of trust and care less or more about that type of money.
Yeah, I think you're right. It comes back to the idea of like Bitcoin as a tool or Bitcoin as a ideology that Sergey has. Like perhaps it's not the key to build more Bitcoiners, but actually find really real use cases of using it. For example, I know I just interviewed a guy. Sorry, I forgot his name. Prince Don from Afrique. L'Afrique parle Bitcoin. It's like a weekly space in French for African Bitcoiners.
Yeah, I know him. I gave him a full page ad for free in the French version of last year's Bitcoin Takeover magazine.
Yeah, that's cool. And he's really smart. And he has been telling me the use cases of using Bitcoin in Africa are not like necessarily against inflation, like the narratives that the people are pushing on the Western side, but it's really about making payments, right? Because it's so complicated to do businesses between borders in Africa that Bitcoin is actually the fastest, the cheapest, and even if the volatility is pretty strong, it's actually the most efficient way, right? So I think we should focus more on those than just like hodling forever and not touching your Bitcoin. I think this kind of mentality also restrains the growth, the individual growth of some people in Bitcoin. It's like, as you said, like the mining fiat mentality. Why you don't sell a part of your Bitcoin and try to make a business out of it to eventually gain more, right? I don't know. This whole anti-entrepreneurial spirit is frustrating for me, but I don't know.
Yeah, you should not be making money off of Bitcoin or try to make more Bitcoin off of Bitcoiners because you're a scammer.
No, but I mean, you could invest, you could sell, for example, you invest in Bitcoin cheap, you make a profit in fiat. So you try to invest a part of that Bitcoin that increased in fiat value into a business that do other type of services to in order to generate some Bitcoins out of that fiat price increase in fiat. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And I very much understand what you're saying. And the struggle is real, especially for content creators, because people take this for granted. They're going to be like, oh, I can listen to this for free. I don't care about this guy. Maybe he's going to succeed, maybe not. But I got this information for free. And it's the same with open source wallets and other types of projects. Like you build something, everyone expects it to be available for free, but not too many people are going to financially contribute to the success of the project. And you have to really understand that and find partners or sponsors or something that are aligned with your mission and understand what you're doing and believe in what you're doing. And I did have, so I don't want to insult anyone who sponsored my work, but I did have sponsors who had very short-term vision. And they only asked me, so who's going to be on your show? And I gave them a list of guests. And they only stuck around for those guests and didn't care about the rest of what I was going to do next.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate that they supported me, but they did not have any vision. And they didn't care about what was coming next. And they didn't see any long-term potential. They just wanted to be advertised while some big names were going to be invited to my show. And I understand that. But my current sponsors are very much in for the mission. And it took me a long time to find them. And you have to struggle a lot, unfortunately. And you have to do this out of the goodness of your heart, basically, just to keep on going. And hopefully someone will notice, someone will care. And you have to reach out. I mean, doing a podcast comes with the advantage that you become well connected and you're going to end up knowing a lot of people. And this is also why I said that in 2019, when I started my podcast, everyone was also starting a podcast. It was like a bus of newcomers to the podcast scene. And we were all kind of the same in the beginning. It was hard to tell us apart. Maybe as individuals, we were different, but the content was very similar and we had some of the same guests. But that's when you realize, for example, there was the Coin Pod by Zach Voel, and he did about 30 episodes. And then he got employed by, I'm not sure if it was Casa or Blackstream. He had a lot of jobs. But once he got a good job in the space, he stopped doing the podcast.
Mhm.
I noticed that. And I don't blame him. I realized, okay, so the purpose for his podcast were for him to get a job.
Mhm.
Sometimes you also do a podcast because you want to have more influence in the space and you want to get better paid for the job that you already have, which is another good use case. But I realized that I was doing this for the sake of it because I wanted to work on my own project and I wanted to learn more. And podcasts are very selfish because you speak with very smart people and you get to learn from them, from their struggles and from their work. And you become so much better at understanding what's going on only by hosting a podcast. And then also the listeners get the benefit of getting the same information for free. But I very much enjoy interacting with other people and learning. And I also discovered that a very good reason why people want to sponsor me is that I can connect them to others to help them make partnerships. Because I've interviewed many people in the space and I can tell them, if you want to start a campaign with this, I know someone who can help you. And then I know that this other company also has shared values and they can contribute to this. So this is another dimension of being a podcaster that can be very much valuable. But
Mhm.
once again, the hardest part is to survive. If you keep going and you keep going for a few years, people are going to remember what you're doing and they're going to appreciate you and give you maybe panels to moderate at conferences or keynote presentations if you're lucky.
Mhm.
But this is a sort of acknowledgement. This is a way of learning that, okay, you have become this guy in the community and they love this part of what you're doing and you can grow and you can keep on expanding because you get some exposure and some acknowledgement from the others. And this is a very valuable way to promote your own work by getting involved with the most hardcore community. At the same time, you should also, if you want to be successful and you want to make money, you can approach it like Peter McCormack and target the audience that is not hardcore but has some interest in it. And I think from a financial point of view, I told you this before we started recording, but from a financial point of view, it makes a lot of sense because the newbies are the ones that buy stuff.
Mhm.
The advanced users, the OGs, they already have what they need. They just need some information from you, not stuff that they can buy. So it's easier to find sponsors and make money when you're appealing to a newbie audience that needs to buy everything and has no opinions on anything. So whatever you tell them to buy, they're going to get it. Unfortunately, I was not smart enough to figure this out.
Now, there's one thing you said that it's like doing the podcast for the sake of it. I think that's what distinguish a lot yours from other ones that, as you said, they pop up and they disappear after 30 episode because you get a good job. Is that you can really feel like the mission behind it, and that's what I like about yours. And they're more conversational, more than transactional type of episodes. I feel.
Oh, thank you. But I also think, so sorry to interrupt, but I remember at one point in 2020, I'm not sure if it was Stefan Livera or someone else, but they said something along the lines of there are way too many Bitcoin podcasts.
Mhm.
I understand what they meant in the sense that too many people approach the exact same topic, as in they get a guest and ask them, so how did you get into Bitcoin? Why do you think this is a nice monetary technology and stuff like that? So yeah, maybe that there's too much of this stuff, but there's not enough of specific niche stuff. There's a need for lightning podcasts. There's a need for sidechain oriented podcasts because there is so much happening at the same time that it's very hard to keep up. So if someone specializes in a field, it can be very narrow in terms of audience, but very productive because you are oriented towards this type of audience and this type of technological advancement. And I think that there's a very great need for more people to become experts in one niche as opposed to try to become Joe Rogans as most podcasters do.
I see. What do you think about Nostr? There was a really big push, like maybe 3-4 months ago. Everybody was pushing for Nostr, but sometimes you have like these trends in Bitcoin where something blows up, but then it starts to be silent. What do you think about it?
I post on it every day. So I cross-post my stuff on Twitter and Nostr. Actually, it's pronounced no star, which means good night in Welsh. This is something I found out from Ben Ark, who is
How? Sorry, Nostr?
No star.
No star. Okay, no star.
No star, like no star on the sky. It's from Welsh, and yeah, it means something to them, but most people say no star. I love the project. I think it's the purest form of Bitcoin project. No token, no VC funding. I mean, there's Jack Dorsey who put some money in it. Okay, but it did not get compromised in the sense that someone can impose something on the development or ask them to make profits. And I know the guys work on it. There's Ben Ark, whom I already mentioned. There's Fiat Jeff, who is basically the father of No Star. He is the one who took the project and improved it and pushed it up to the point where it got to Jack Dorsey, and that's when I guess the most hype happened. And there's also Melvin Carvalho, who's he's so OG that he's the one who introduced Amir Taki to Bitcoin. And Amir Taki is the guy who created the BIP process for proposals to improve Bitcoin. So he's that OG. And he's at a point in his life where I think that he works on whatever he wants. And I very much appreciate that these people work and find satisfaction in completing projects as opposed to deciding to retire on some beach in an exotic place. I have great respect for these people because they could be anywhere in the world doing anything they want, but they choose to create stuff. And I see myself in a similar position if I ever become super rich. I'm only going to help more people create and tell their stories about Bitcoin. But that's besides the point. Nostr is incredibly great, but also misunderstood and very young as a protocol. I think it got better over the last few months of this year because there used to be a time when you would not see a lot of stuff because of relaying problems. But more people started running their own relays, which are network nodes, and it became more reliable and faster. The reason why it's not getting much traction is that it's very hard for it to compete with Twitter promising to give you part of the revenue. And it doesn't have the media hype of Facebook threads or stuff like that. It doesn't have a marketing department. That's what I'm trying to say. It's only enthusiasts who decide that they want to push this type of technology. And it's just like non-custodial wallet adoption in Bitcoin. Most people are still on exchanges. You can spend a lot of time improving the experience on non-custodial wallets and make hardware wallets affordable, but most people don't care for reasons which concern laziness, lack of interest, and just the idea that they wanted to get on the hype train, but they don't care enough to learn more. And I guess that's part of the process. You should not expect everything to happen all at once. You should not expect everyone to be enthusiastic. There are a lot of tourists who go from one hype event to the other. It used to be ICOs, and then they became metaverse experts, and then they became NFT advisors, and now they are AI consultants, and they're going to move on to the next trend as long as it sounds fancy and it pays. It's fine with these people, but Nostr is a hardcore project that's not related to Bitcoin, but it's made by Bitcoiners. And I think it's a protocol that can be very useful. And I spoke with Ben Ark. You can check out my interview with him. It's season 14, episode 5, I think, with Ben Ark. And he explained to me that this whole concept of using relays for data is very young, and it can be used for lots of stuff like marketplaces. and there are a couple of them in the works right now. One of them is called Diagonally, and it's made by Ben Ark. And the other one is called, let me check it. It's called CivKit, and it's made by the guy from Paxful, Ray
Uh, yeah,
Joseph.
I follow him. He's really colorful personage. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think Ray has a very good heart,
Mhm.
but at the same time, he is a weird person, and he can agree with this. And
Yeah.
weird is good in his case. It's
Mhm.
very nice. He's a bit wacky. I think that's a better way to describe him. But I love the way that he is, and he is a Puritan, and he very much believes in the mission, and that's something that I can only respect. And he also has high regard for the third world and especially Africa. He calls it the global south, but he spent a lot of time. I think he is half Egyptian or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he spent a lot of time going to Africa and speaking, interacting with people. And he understands that there's this hustler overcoming mentality among young men in Africa. And he wants to take advantage of, not take advantage, that's an ugly expression, but he wants to channel that energy and help these young men create more wealth for themselves. And he's working on an open market project on Noster, which is called CivKit.
Mhm.
I think that's very cool. And I think Noster is only getting started. It's very hard to keep average users interested when it's still a bit technical, it's quirky. It doesn't have all the people you don't like. And that's something that I told the Noster creators, that on Twitter, I can make fun of Christine Lagarde. I can make fun of Peter Schiff. I can post memes under like my president's thread or something. Like I can troll people I don't like, and that's not something you can do on Noster. Noster is a bubble. It's where you find the people you know. It's where you find the people who agree with you. And sometimes that's not very healthy. You need the people who also disagree with you, and you need debate. And you don't get much debate on Noster. You get, on one hand, you get the hardcore Bitcoiners, and on the other hand, you get the spammers who try to promote either shitcoins or porn or something because they know it cannot be censored.
So why you use the same cross-posting strategy on Nostr and Twitter if the audience on Nostr probably already agrees with you, wouldn't you need to adapt it for that type of audience that already agrees? How do you think the content will evolve on Nostr?
That's a good question. Well, I guess I'm lazy, because it's easier for me to copy paste the exact same stuff and put it on Noster. And it's also interesting to see that I always get less engagement no matter what on Noster. But that's fine because the user base is lower. I have fewer followers. And also, there's no algorithm to prioritize content, meaning that you post something and then in the next minute, somebody else posts something else, and your post is going to go lower and lower and lower in the news feed. So the number of people who can see it depends on the relaying system and the news feed of every user, but it only goes lower in time. Whereas on Twitter, it has this algorithm which decides what is a good post and what is not. So maybe that you can tweet something popular and it's gonna be seen by people 2 days later still, which is interesting. But at the same time, it's also detrimental for free speech because you can bury some topics and you can make some voices to never get heard. There are different platforms with different types of users and purposes. I think I still like Twitter for reasons which concern finding all the people you don't like and engaging with them. I think that's the best. I mean, some people would argue that it's the worst part of Twitter, but it's the best part of Twitter because you don't step into bubbles. And that's the problem that the internet has created. Before the internet, we would meet our neighbors, we would meet our politicians in public places and stuff like that. And we would have more open debates. But now the internet makes it so easy to isolate yourself with like-minded individuals and never step outside and never deal with a contrarian opinion. And then you walk into someone in the street and you realize that they disagree with you, and you're like, how does this exist anymore? Because I thought everyone agreed with me. It's a problem, but Twitter, I think, does a pretty good job. Well, there's censorship, obviously, but except for the censored stuff, and also got censored a few times. If you want to have debates on certain topics, it's very useful because you find everyone on all sides and you can read what they're into and where they're coming from. And you can try to understand, because as human beings, we have to be more empathetic and figure out that maybe it's incentives, maybe it's just different ideologies, but it's fine for people to have different opinions. And it's fine for us to agree to disagree, to get to that point where we say, okay, I accept you. I accept that you have a different opinion. Let's just be nice to each other and be peaceful, because it makes no sense to go ahead with fights over this.
It's harder and harder to do this. Yeah, I think you're right in regards of Nostr. It's like with every new thing, you get the initial hype, but then you need to keep on building on it to really gain traction, real traction, and develop something great in the future. I have maybe you heard about the Bitcoin script project by Alex B. Have you heard about it?
Yeah, I mean, I heard about it, and that's a good way to put it, because I didn't have enough time to look into it.
Basically, my question is that, even as somebody that's really invested into the Bitcoin space, if your job is to create content all day, like, well, not your job, like your main activity is to create content out of it, you might be able to navigate the new things more easily. But for example, me, since I have a job at Bitrefill that has, I mean, it's still related to Bitcoin and Lightning and everything, but it's not my main focus. It's really hard to follow everything that is happening. Like, I know there's a debate about drive chain right now, but to be honest, I haven't even had the time to really dive into it and consider everything. And this project in particular aims to present the debates in a simple way. Do you think there's a need for something like that? Because the number of projects is growing and it's harder and harder to follow everything. So what is your opinion on this?
You mean development in general or drive chains?
I guess development in general, like the whole debate of what to activate, what not. Is it at the moment, can it be improved to make some improvements on Bitcoin faster, or we need that slow pace to make sure that everything we put into Bitcoin should be well reviewed? And what's your position on this?
Well, it's only normal for Bitcoin to receive more proposals for improvement, especially as there are more users who come into Bitcoin and they expect different stuff. And we honestly need to scale, and we need to understand that both exchanges and altcoins are scaling layers for Bitcoin. They would not exist if Bitcoin did not emerge. And they basically provide a certain use case that appeals to some users. Some of them are scams and are not going to exist anymore, but there are also other projects that have existed for a number of years and they keep going and they do something different from Bitcoin. And we have to understand that these use cases have had a demand on the market. There's a market for them. And Bitcoin, in order to become money, it needs to be used for pretty much everything. So it makes sense to integrate them into Bitcoin and pick the use cases and the implementations that make most sense. Now, there are different ways of doing it, and I think that this is the major disagreement, because everyone can agree that Bitcoin needs to receive some improvement and needs to add some stuff, but then everyone is going to disagree on how. Obviously, the Bitcoin culture imposes that you don't hard fork. because that's divisive and that's going to end up splitting the network. And it has been part of the culture so far to create simple and elegant soft forks that create workarounds for issues. It's also popular to speak about layers. And I think that's the correct way to go forward, because once again, it's more elegant. And if it fails, it does not affect the base layer. But if you compromise the base layer, it's always going to be compromised. And there's no turning back from that. And I don't think we have a second chance with Bitcoin to launch it once again and have the same network effect, the same fair launch and everything. So we have to really care about the base layer and figure out ways to add stuff and make Bitcoin more useful in ways that don't destroy the core values and the fundamentals of how it works. Now, I'm sympathetic to both layer 2s and layer 3s built on top of Lightning, and also sidechains. And I think both of them are interesting. I think sidechains are more conservative in the sense that they take technology that has been working and has been proven to work, and they add it as something which basically, to access a sidechain, you lock your coins on the Bitcoin layer, on the base layer. And it's a simple lock time contract, which is conditional to certain types of spending. And then your Bitcoin gets issued on the sidechain with the same amount. It's 1-to-1. The sidechain does not have a pre-mine or whatever. It only gets a supply of money proportional to amount of money that gets locked for it on the Bitcoin base layer. And then on the sidechain, you can have extra features like, for example, there's Liquid, which has confidential transactions, and it also has faster block times. You get a new block every 1 minute, but it's centralized, so it's not as great as the Bitcoin base layer. And I think that drive chains as a proposal aim to make this decentralized, meaning that anyone is going to be able to deploy their own sidechain and provide features. And there's going to be a competition. You're going to open a market for this. The criticism is that you're going to enable a lot of scammy chains that may not work and make people lose their coins. And also, the other argument against it is that you're empowering miners. Because on these sidechains, the same miners are going to collect fees for transactions. So miners are going to also mine the sidechains. You're going to extend the amount of control that miners have over the network. And some people don't like that, and they think that Lightning, which relies on individual user nodes, is more balancing, to put it like this.
I see.
It's interesting to have this debate. I find it hard to take absolute sides to say, yeah, we need to activate drive chains right now, or no, drive chains are a stupid idea and we should never use them. I consider Paul Stortz, who is the creator of drive chains, to be the academic type, and he has been very methodic in engaging. I think recently he kind of lost his mind trying to advocate, and he started insulting people, and that's never a good approach, but that's his business. I'm not going to tell him how to proceed, but I very much appreciate his input. And I think that he brings the kind of conversation that we're not having anymore, because his flavor of Bitcoin maximalism is that Bitcoin is king and everything that's interesting in altcoins is going to come back to Bitcoin in some shape or form. But there's another culture of maximalism which was developed since 2018, which basically says that everything that is not Bitcoin is a scam. And you have a subset of users who are reluctant to the idea of integrating something like decentralized exchanges from Ethereum because they think it's a scam and they associate it with previous scams. And I think it ultimately comes down to trying to understand where you're standing. Are you Bitcoin only to the extent that you might risk being co-opted by the state and becoming part of a situation where Bitcoin is a governmental currency controlled and surveilled by governments, but you're going to say that you're Bitcoin only? Or are you going to accept that Bitcoin is part of the cypherpunk culture and that the purpose of it is to do stuff without banks and without the state? And you might want to have layers where you can, for example, mint stable coins with the Bitcoin that you own so that you can take an algorithmic loan and you can pay it back. And this way you don't go to the state and you get this stable coin that you can exchange for cash if you want in some places. And basically you bypassed the banking system by doing this. And you also bypassed creating a tax event because taking a loan is not like selling. There are different types of events in the tax codes. So I think this side of Ethereum is actually interesting. The whole, what they call DeFi. Unfortunately, like a lot of stuff in Ethereum, it became a degenerate activity of people transacting stuff that has no value but was inflated and was overhyped. And then there was a bubble that formed and it burst and people think that it's over. But there is some interesting stuff there. Basically, you can do stuff like BlockFi and Celsius, but without the institution part, without the legal team, without the humans that interfere in the middle. And I think this is very interesting because it helps you achieve the initial point of Bitcoin, which was to not deal with banks, to create this parallel economy. And if you want a parallel economy, you also want the services. And it's kind of strange to me that the Bitcoin culture, and this is an unpopular opinion, but it's more accepting among the community for you to say, I'm using institutions that have good reputation to deposit or to get services from my Bitcoin, than to say I'm using this decentralized finance protocol and I think it's a pretty good idea to build it. They're going to say you're a scammer if you want to do stuff like that. But I think that ideologically and practically, it's a pretty good idea to extend what Bitcoin does.
I tend to agree with you. I think it depends of in which school of thought you were forged while you learned Bitcoin and who was surrounding you, to which even the city where you live in. Perhaps there's certain group of people that have a ideology more Bitcoin maxi, like not trying to touch anything else. So, for example, for me, I got forged in the Bitcoin maximalism of Montreal with Francis Pouliot, with with that type of thinking and history. But with my years in Bitcoin, I think I'm more open right now, as you said, and I think it's a question of finding the balance between being conservatives but also being open to other ideas. So I think I agree with you on that sense. I don't want to retain you too long. Maybe last one or two last questions. How does it feel to be interviewed and not being the interviewer for once? I mean, you probably went on other podcasts as well to talk for experience, but how is it to switch time to time?
I turned on my camera once again because I charged it a bit. So it's fun. It's fun to not have to worry, because when you have a guest, you have extra thoughts in your mind about, okay, what should I ask next, or what should I use from what I have been told to extend or expand the conversation. So when you don't have concerns like that and you just talk, it's more relaxing. I didn't even realize how much time has passed with our interview, but I'm happy that we did this, and I hope that someone finds it useful. And if you listened up to this point, because by now, let me see, has it been 2 hours or longer? I don't know, but if you did listen up to this point, you're a hero and you deserve acknowledgement for your effort and for your contribution to becoming a better Bitcoiner. You don't have to agree with me 100% or agree with anyone, just form your own opinion. This is the part of decentralization that a lot of people don't grasp that it's fine to have divergent opinions. And it's this clash of ideas that creates a better civilization. So just listen to everyone you can and whoever you think makes sense, and form your own opinions and see how you can make Bitcoin a better project, because once again, it's decentralized. The decision making is not in the hands of some gatekeeper. You are part of it. Everything that you do every day and the way in which you interact with the network establishes a culture, and everyone who comes after you is going to become part of that culture. So I think we are personally responsible for everything that happens with Bitcoin, and we should embrace that, not be afraid to engage or stuff like that. But yeah, it's fun to be interviewed.
Cool. I think that sums up well. It's the first half English, half French podcast of lasaucebitcoin. I think it went well, and thank you again for your participation. And I think you speak great French, so I hope to see you speak French more in the future as well.
I need to get challenged, because I never. So if you work in English every day and you don't live in a place where people speak French, and you don't hear it anymore, and you don't have much time to listen to French stuff, you tend to forget. It's like a muscle that you haven't exercised in a long time. So it was fun and challenging for me to come up with answers and then translate them and then read them out loud. I hope that I did a good job and you were able to understand what I was saying. And maybe I should try to do this more often. I don't know. You just encouraged me to join more French shows. I'm gonna try this. I don't know.
Perfect. I think you should. Donc, merci beaucoup et à la prochaine.